Baltimore City State's Attorney Ivan Bates marking his first 100 days in office.
Baltimore's residents must and will come first.
The city's top prosecutor working to tackle the biggest issues in a city in crisis, from rising juvenile crime and chaos in the Inner Harbor.
You got kids killing kids out here like they fighting in a war.
To violent repeat offenders.
Guns ain't the problem, it's always the people behind the gun.
And a police department hundreds of officers short.
It's more guns on the street than it is police.
Tonight, Fox 45 News bringing your questions and concerns directly to Ivan Bates in our Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us for tonight's Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall, coming to you from the New Metropolitan Baptist Church. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mackenzie Frost. We are marking Baltimore City State's Attorney Ivan Bates' first 100 days in office. Let's get right to our panelists who are joining us this evening. First, we have Baltimore City Sheriff Sam Cogan, former Mayor Sheila Dixon.
Good evening.
Baltimore City Councilman for this district, Eric Costello, and of course, Baltimore City State's Attorney, Ivan Bates. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, panelists.
Thank you.
We have a lot to talk about, and so let's get right to it. First, let's talk about the General Assembly session. It just wrapped up days ago. Ivan Bates, you were pretty successful with the one piece of legislation that you were really championing through the session. Talk to me about what hurdles you faced, and it wasn't looking like it was going to get passed, this bill that you were pushing to increase the maximum penalty for first-time misdemeanor gun possession charges for people 21 and older. But it ultimately passed.
It did. I think anytime you're a newly elected official, you have to understand, quote unquote, the way Annapolis works. And it took me a little while to understand. It took me a little while to get my footing. The sponsorships of the bill, explain the bill time and time again. That's just what needed to happen. Also, we're going against the past 12 years. No one had ever really increased any of the criminal penalties. So you're also dealing with that aspect as well. Little by little, it looked like to some people that the bill was done, but we were able to have a conversation with a number of individuals, a bill sponsor, Delegate Conaway, who was there, also Senator Corey McCray. We were able to have conversations with the leadership on both the House and the Senate. Speaker Jones, as well as our state senator from our city, who's the Senate President, Bill Ferguson. Based on those conversations, I think they totally understood the importance of this bill, how the citizens and the community really wanted to hold individuals accountable. And then it wasn't really even anything I could do. I think they understood that it was really the people that wanted this bill to happen. And at the end of the day, I think there was a plan, and they executed the plan that they had perfectly.
Sheriff Cogan, from a law enforcement perspective, do you think that this piece of legislation will make a difference in a place like Baltimore City, where we know gun violence continues to be a problem?
I do. I think that the state's attorney asked for it, and the state's attorney should get the tools that he needs to prosecute people and hold people accountable. So it was important that this bill passed. I know when I was out campaigning, it's the biggest issue is gun violence in the city. Everyone is concerned in every neighborhood about gun violence, and anything we can do to try to reduce that and hold people accountable, I think it's very important.
Looking at the implementation of this plan, how long do you think it'll be before we see cases that you, State's Attorney Bates, can bring utilizing this new piece of legislation?
Well, day one, when we have the opportunity, we're going to start bringing those cases. Now the maximum penalty for 18 to 21 is, from 21 on above, is 5 years. So day one is going to be a 5-year penalty. And, we were already prosecuting handgun cases. We already said that if you have an illegal handgun, we're asking for jail time. But now what it says is that, this is the individual that may have won 2 or 3 handgun cases, has gotten away and beaten the system, so to speak, a number of times. That's the individual we're looking at to say 5 years. Also, what this message says is for the individual that's on the cusp, that isn't the individual who's going to carry a gun regularly, but carries a gun just to follow suit with everybody. That person, we're saying don't carry a gun because you weren't made to go to Division of Correction, because we will ask for the Division of Correction if we need to. It's the type of tool that my prosecutors need in their toolbox. We don't always need to use it, but we know if we need it, it's there.
Are you hearing from people in the city, in the community, that they are realizing that this is happening and changes are being made?
Without a doubt, without a doubt. You know, right here, you're in my my church home, and I remember coming in on Sunday, and a number of my fellow parishioners, they were happy. They watched it. They followed it. When I'm walking around in this Baltimore, people say, congratulations, we were really excited that you got the gun bill. Because it really wasn't about me. It was about them. Because I think so many people in the city felt that no one was listening to them. So many people in the city felt that no one was fighting for them. And I think they got behind this bill to say, you know what? This person is fighting for me. He's fighting for us. He's fighting for our community. That they knew it wasn't about mass incarceration, but they knew that we needed to do something, and this bill really says that we're doing something different. They're very excited about that.
Mayor Dixon, during your tenure and your administration, we saw homicides were below 300. What do you think was the key to your success?
Well, I think it was a combination of areas. I mean, today you're dealing with a lot of violent juveniles. We didn't have the numbers that we're having now, but we focused on going after the most violent offenders. We try to incorporate community policing. We try to also follow after Mayor Bloomberg in New York with the gun registry, where if an individual was caught with a gun, that they had to register that gun, and that all the various entities, agencies would follow up with that person to make sure if they're on parole. Are you looking for a job? What are you doing? I mean, literally go knock on the door. I would make visits with them. So those were pieces of it. We also dealt with a lot of preventive measures that I know this administration is attempting to do, because you have to look at this holistically. It's not about arresting your way out of here, out of this, locking up everyone, but it's about looking at your community, trying to provide and partner. And that's the other piece that was significant in my administration. We partnered with the Sheriff's Department, the state's attorney, the school police, the federal prosecutor. We all were on the same page, communicating regularly through crime stat, through city stat.
I want to come back to juvenile crime, because that obviously is a big issue. We just saw what happened not too long ago at the Inner Harbor, and I know that there's a curfew plan that will be in place starting Memorial Day. But Councilman Costello, what do you think needs to be done at the city and at the state level to address violent crime and repeat violent offenders, something that we continue to see as an issue? Legislation didn't make it through this year in Annapolis to target repeat offenders.
First, I want to take a moment to thank Pastor Dinkins and New Metropolitan Baptist Church for hosting this conversation this evening. You know, I think we made a lot of progress in Annapolis this past legislative session. Our partners, especially the city delegation on both the Senate and the House side, did a lot of hard work. I know Delegate Klippinger spearheaded some legislation around transport and carry of concealed weapons. So, you know, we made some progress. We certainly didn't get everything that was necessary, but you know, it's not something that can be accomplished in 1 year. A lot of these bills take years to pass. They take compromise, working with both sides of the aisle, members of the General Assembly from different places throughout the state who have different constituencies. I think the bill that the state's attorney pushed for this year, that he was successful in working with our city delegation on, was really a step in the right direction. And we need to continue to think in that lens as we move forward.
The bill that you were talking about from Delegate Klippinger is actually the bill that Ivan Bates's bill got rolled into and passed. Looking at juvenile violence, it seems to be it's a growing problem. The curfew, like we said, is coming up. Sheriff Kogan, how is your department going to be involved in implementing this or enforcing this curfew come the summer?
Right. So we're meeting with the mayor's office. We don't know what it looks like now. They're trying to plan on what this curfew enforcement is going to look like.
Does that concern you that you don't know what it looks like yet?
It doesn't concern me. I mean, it could be many things. And so it could be highly effective or it could be disorganized. And we want to make sure that if we're going to be involved in it, that it's highly effective and that all the partners are talking and it's a protocol that makes sense. And so we're looking forward to be an equal partner in that. And as we're out there and doing our roles as sheriff's deputies do, they go out on the street and they the same authority as the police department. They issue tickets, they can pull people over, they can make arrests, they serve warrants, and they're around in every area of the city. If they see a juvenile who's out at night, we want to know what we can do with that person that makes sense. And so we're really looking forward to working with all the partners to develop something that we can do if we see a juvenile who's not doing what they're supposed to do or not where they're supposed to be at a time they're not supposed to be that, and being disruptive and putting themselves in danger and other people, how we can be effective. So we're actually looking forward to be a partner in that discussion.
And looking at the way that you're running this department, I understand it's different from previous administrations. How do you see your deputies getting involved? Are we going to see them out in the communities, being proactive, being part of this law enforcement conversation as we look at ways to tackle the violent crime and keep people safe, especially this summer?
Yes. The short answer is yes. You're going to see the deputies way more involved. You're going to see them out there. You're going to see me out there. Our deputies, like I said, we have a small law enforcement agency that's been untapped in the city, which is the sheriff's office. And the former mayor talked about how we partnered with her to serve arrest warrants, but you're also going to see us in a more traditional patrol function in the city as well.
How are the warrants going? How is that area within your department?
It's going well. We just brought up a warrant group that's serving the warrants that the state's attorney's requesting in court. And those warrants are for people who are on probation, who have violated that probation. And a lot of times, they're the repeat violent offenders we're talking about. They've committed a violent crime, they're placed on probation, they go out and commit another crime. And so it's a priority of our office to try to go after people like that and make sure we're bringing them back in front of the court and bring them back in front of the state's attorney so he can do what he needs to do.
And looking at the Department of Juvenile Services, I know that we have a new secretary for the Department of Juvenile Services, tapped by Governor Wes Moore. What concerns you, State's Attorney Bates, about the direction, if anything, that DJS is heading, given the situation that we're seeing right now with juveniles? Well,
I actually had a concern before the new commissioner. I believe last year's legislative session, I think the Juvenile Justice Act, if I'm not mistaken, and that took a lot of the ability for state's attorneys to actually decide the charging of some of these offenses. And that's been kind of difficult in trying to deal with that. In many ways, when I talk to my juvenile prosecutors, they feel their hands are almost tied. One of the things that I thought was very important is that, say if you had two young people that were in a fight, once they get in a fight, that's an opportunity to give these young people the wraparound services that they really need. But DJS now can make a decision not to do anything and no one knows about it at all. And it's not about having any arrests, it's not about having any records, it's about getting those services right away to those individuals. It could just be simple as, you know, their intake, and with their intake we have these wraparound services, and then they come back after they've had the intake and understand. It could be simple as having anger management classes on how to deal with issues when two people are, you know, having a disagreement. And I feel if we can get these young people at an earlier age and an earlier stage, then hopefully now they've learned how to deal with some of the anger management issues as they get older. And that's what's so concerning to me. And because of the law, we don't really understand what DJS is really doing with a lot of these cases. So they're kind of operating in the dark in a way that we really, meaning we, the state's attorney's office, we can't really see. We don't really know what's going on. And that is very concerning to me.
You know, one of the things that I would just add and make a suggestion, since this is State's Attorney Ivan Bates' first 100 days, as well as the administration, and we have a new governor and a new Secretary of Juvenile Services. One of the things that we did, and it was effective, is that we brought the different levels of government together. And we actually came up with a strategy and a plan where we literally, in some cases, went into Juvenile Justice Center, and we I personally ended up mentoring a young person. And I remember because he wanted to get his driver's license, but then he got transferred to Ohio or somewhere. So I think it's important that the new secretary, who's new to Baltimore, really sits down with the different public safety entities and really come up with a strategy and plan. Because the bottom line is you don't want to lock up everybody. You don't want to lock up these young people. But today the challenges of our young people are so much more serious than in the past. And there is a lot of trauma that they face and deal with. There's a lot of issues going on in families. And I think sitting down and coming up with a strategy, it might be potentially legislation for next year for the state's attorney, since he's got experience in how to deal with the General Assembly.
Why do you think that it is so different now compared to your administration when it comes to juveniles? You mentioned perhaps the level of trauma that young people are experiencing and being exposed to, but when you talk about not locking up kids, I don't think anybody here is saying lock up every kid whoever breaks the law, but what does accountability look like?
Well, that's part of what the concern is. There's not accountability in the home. Over the last 10, 15 years now, the school system is deplorable. I'm just hurt. It hurts me based on my tax dollars going in there and what's going on with our schools. And when we have schools, charter schools, et cetera, doing a good job, we want to go after them. So there's a whole host of things. That's why I believe in the community school concept for our Baltimore City Public Schools, where you have initiatives for that family, for that child, for that parent. I'm currently working with a group now at Furman Templeton, where we're working with their truancy program. And so we're going out visiting that family, that child, to see what their needs are. If it was mental health services, if it's jobs, whatever it is, if it's drug treatment, you know, you have to deal with folks, kids and their families at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Councilman Costello, looking at the role of city police, or the school police rather, do you think that there's a role for them to ensure students are going to class, not leaving school during the school day and school hours? We know that some of the shootings that we've seen are kids committing crimes against other kids. These victims are also students, and it's all happening when they should be in school.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a role for them to play. I think it's important to note we probably have about 185 different school programs in the city. Across 150 different facilities, and schools police has a sworn contingent of maybe 100 or 110 officers. So it's pretty challenging for them to be everywhere at once. I think working off of the community schools model, as Mayor Dixon alluded to, you know, just in this catchment area right here, she mentioned Furman Templeton, the University of Maryland, Baltimore School of Social Work. They have the Promise Heights program. They're providing a host of supports. It's not just going out and checking for truancy. It's you know, classes for expecting mothers. It's food pantries, assistance, you know, washing clothes, making sure they've got meals, not just for lunch and breakfast, but after school, so that they're focused on learning. And I think really harnessing those programs and continuing to help empower them throughout the community. But it's had a very noticeable impact here at Furman, at Coleridge Taylor, at Booker T, at Renaissance, and Utah Marshburn. So we need to figure out a way to scale up that model across the entire city.
Is it too much to ask for schools to make sure that the students who are supposed to be there during the day, they walk in and they don't leave during the school day?
Look, I think there's a lot of frustration over the performance of city schools. It's been widely reported. Again, as former Mayor Dixon said, it breaks my heart to see that we're performing in that way for our young people. So we certainly have to do more, and I really think everything is on the table. And what comes with additional funding for our schools through the blueprint is additional support services and making sure that our kids are in a safe place all day long and have a safe place to learn.
You bring up funding. I know that the budget season is here, and we're looking at ways to allocate funding. The blueprint is expecting, the mayor came out and said that it's going to cost $79 million this year, when the city had been expecting it to be $12 million. So that's a significant hit to the budget. Do you plan to use the city council's newly given authority to move money around this year when it comes to schools and perhaps other programs that are from the mayor's office that may or may not be performing as expected?
We expect to pass a balanced budget. We've done that all 6 years that I've chaired this process, and my expectation is this year will be no different. I think there's really three ways that we can attack this problem of the shortfall of school funding as required by the blueprint. The first was from support from our partners at the state. That's obviously passed because General Assembly session has ended. The other two ways are cuts across the board to agencies at a certain percentage. And then the third piece of it is going to be, one time from fund balance, which is essentially think of it as your additional savings account. So I think we're going to be able to find a way to make it work for this year. What we're really focused on is figuring out how to make it sustainable throughout the future. As to the new authority that the City Council has, we're treating that new authority as a reason to do, much greater level of preparation for the budget this year. So we've started on the council a couple months early and really, looking everywhere where there's additional funds to try and figure out how to make sure that we're providing a scope and quality of services that our residents expect and deserve.
State's Attorney Bates, are you prepared for your budget presentation? Are you looking to ask for even more resources this year?
We've been working on through that process, and we're getting there. The first part that I want to do is focus on the infrastructure of the office. My Chief Operating Officer, Catherine Flynn, who's here, has been working very hard with preparing the budget. And when it's at time, we will. We have some asks that are very, very important. We have some funding issues, like every organization. But we feel that, I wrote an op-ed on 100 days. We have, 51 new hires, 33 new state's attorneys, 16 of which were former state's attorneys. We have issues in reference to body camera footage and what's going on and who's looking at that material. And that hurts our prosecutors' ability to prosecute cases. We found out some of the issues that we had internally have caused a number of prosecutors to leave. And so when we look at all those issues, we've now made requests on the federal level, the state level, and also the local level with our budget. And so we do feel that with all those requests that we will hopefully be able to get the money needed. I think that we're headed in the right direction, but at the end of the day, we definitely need the funding because we need to make sure that we're moving in that direction. But if I do not give those prosecutors the tools that they need to be successful, the support that they need to be successful, then my fear is that you can even see more prosecutors leave. They believe in us right now that we're moving in the right direction. They believe that we're going to do that. And so my goal and hope is that we will do that. But everything I know, we're moving and we're prepared, and we will be prepared. I believe it's May 4th.
State's Attorney Bates, thank you so much. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
We've had a couple phone calls.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Welcome back, and thanks for sticking with us for the Fox 45 News, Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. We're marking State's Attorney Ivan Bates' first 100 days in office. And State's Attorney Bates, I want to go back to the General Assembly, and this is really a question for all of our panelists. So pay attention because I'm going to be coming to everyone for an answer. But we'll start with State's Attorney. I want to talk about Senate Bill 1, and really this was a big priority for the General Assembly this entire session. How do you see SB 1 now that it has passed? Hasn't been signed yet by the governor, but now that it's through, how do you see that really impacting the violent crime efforts to curb this, especially when it comes to gun violence?
I kind of look at the law this way. Senate Bill 1 looks at individuals who have legally purchased their handguns, legally have a concealed carry permit, and there's going to be some frustration on those individuals. I think sometimes there'll be some confusion with the law. And one of the things that I think we have to do as a prosecutor, we have to use our common sense. And I like to give an example of a case that we had recently. And a young man from the state of West Virginia had a handgun. And West Virginia purchased it legally, but there is no concealed carry permit. But the gun was transported, the actual gun was in the trunk, but the magazine was in the front of the car. Police stop him for offense, they find the gun, and then he's charged. So my common sense said, okay, I understand this individual's from a different state, I understand the law is different. Do we really make sense to prosecute this individual that, and West Virginia has done everything proper? We made a decision not to, but to take the handgun away, but to also say, look, this is your one warning, don't do that. So I think there will be some confusion with the law. I think we have to make sure that if we decide not to prosecute, individuals who purchase their weapons legally, that there's an educational component. So you'll see a lot of what I think is common sense, making sure that we don't harm legal gun owners, but to make sure that they understand that they also have to follow the laws and the rules.
Given the problems that we're seeing with illegal guns in Baltimore City, do you think the General Assembly should have spent so much time addressing legal gun owners and not really addressing illegal guns or implementing penalties for illegal gun owners?
Well, I mean, that's a little difficult. You know, I'm not a member of the General Assembly. I have one focus, one bill, so I know they focused on my bill. What I will say is that I think in 2024, I probably will have a lot more to focus on. And then I think from our standpoint, if we're prosecutors and we see the problems, we see the issues, it's upon us to make sure we articulate that to the members of the legislature. And I think that I need to make sure that when I go down in 2024, that I talk to the people and understand their issues and concerns. I just figure out what we need with the law and try to change that.
Mayor Dixon, what do you think about the attention spent on legal gun owners versus not really a lot of attention on illegal gun owners?
I was concerned that the focus was on legal gun owners. And with this bill, there's going to have to be a lot of education that has to be done. But I also think, and I really feel it strongly, and this is where the citizens come in, you have to reach out to your legislators to let them know what your priorities are. For example, I work with minority companies, and so when I was down there, I focused on bills that dealt with making sure that they could get paid, making sure that they weren't fined if they were doing certain things with their companies. You know, those kind of issues that the comptroller had put in about prompt payment, things like that. That was my focus because those are the companies that I work with. But as a citizen, I think people miss it when you go down there, because sometimes, for me, the focus should be insurance. They control what happens as it relates to our car insurance and other insurances, and other issues that, from my opinion, never get dealt with. So I think it's really educating the public about it, and I think the citizens have to speak up on what their priorities are as well, and illegal guns have to be addressed and dealt with.
I hear that, but don't you think lawmakers should know that illegal guns are the problem?
They should know, and it's interesting. And I'm not going to, and if I offend any of them, at this point in time in my life, I really don't care, as I do sometimes with the council people. The bottom line is sometimes people go into these positions and they have their agenda and not the people they represent. And that's the mistake that we make. And that's why we as citizens have to be more vocal about what the priorities should be.
Councilman Costello, what do you think about this?
I agree with Mayor Dixon that we need to do a better job of advocating to our state legislators.
Did you advocate for going after illegal guns this session?
I'm very lucky in that the state legislators that represent the district I represent, Senate President Ferguson and Senator Antonio Hayes, are incredibly competent, hardworking, skilled, and dedicated legislators. So I've had an opportunity to, have one-on-one conversations with them about my concerns. I think they're all aware of the challenges that we're facing in Baltimore City around violent crime. I think it's also important to note that not every jurisdiction in the state out of 23 counties plus the city is dealing with the same issues. And a lot of what happens in Annapolis is compromise and working with your colleagues to make things work across a very, very broad spectrum of issues. But I think there's always more that we can do. And I think, as you heard the state's attorney say, he's going to be active in those discussions. And I can we'll continue to support his efforts and others around those areas.
Sheriff Kogan, are you worried about illegal guns in the city and the lack of action to tackle that problem in Annapolis?
Well, so we were talking about kids before, right? And we're talking about children shooting children, our children being shot. And we look at gatherings and we say, well, why is that bad that people gather? It's bad because we have shootings and people can be killed and people are killed.
Right.
And so that's what I'm really focused on. I'm focused on what I can do in my role to try to prevent that, to try to work with the state's attorney, to try to work with the legislature, to try to take my office and make it part of that solution. And so, that's what I'm laser focused on. The illegal use of firearms to harm people in our city, which is a huge problem. And so when we implement laws, we have to enforce them. So the legal carrying of firearms, that's something that we want to make sure people follow the rules. We want to make sure people don't leave their firearm out and a child gets it and they kill themselves, which happens all the time. And we want to make sure that people aren't settling disputes now that they have a firearm they can carry. They're not just going to pull it out and use it because they think they want to. So for a very short period of time, I taught the class that was implemented to civilians on that they need to purchase firearms and also to carry concealed. And one of the things I saw was that a lot of people who were in that class had no understanding of what happens when you pull that trigger and someone dies and someone gets hurt. And it's really, no one wins in that situation. It's a terrible thing. But at the same time, we're talking about people who are carrying a firearm because they want to protect themselves, and they're carrying it lawfully. And then someone who's carrying the firearm unlawfully, that's going out to rob people, hurt people, and kill people. And I think the latter is what we should be laser focused on here.
Let me ask you this. Next year during the General Assembly, what laws could be passed that would give both of you the tools that you need to go after these illegal gun owners? Because we often hear that the conversation is about illegal gun owners, but laws really kind of get muddled. So what specific laws that would help, that could be passed, that would give you the tools that you need to really, as you said, laser focus in on that?
I'm going to let you answer that one.
You know, to me, one of the things that we really need to do is we're focused on juveniles, right? But I also want to understand where the parents. So we need to try to figure out what laws can we put in place to try to hold the parents accountable. Because, you know, my office recently charged a grandmother who allegedly left her handgun unattended, legal handgun, and is, you know, alleged the 9-year-old got the gun and allegedly murdered a 15-year-old. We charged that grandmother. Now, we didn't charge her with manslaughter, and we need to look at those types of laws to see how we can hold those individuals accountable. So legal gun owners, we also have to hold you accountable if you're going to do that. But illegal gun owners, if you're going to give these guns to these juveniles, if you're building these ghost guns, we have to focus on those, and maybe those are the individuals that need the mandatory minimums to understand if you're going to be found guilty of giving a handgun to a juvenile, that's the individual that needs a mandatory minimum to sit down and say, we will not allow you to do this to our children. And so, you know, we have to think about that, you know, understand how we can do that, how we can make that happen. It's not as easy as it seems, but I do believe if we sit down and really have those conversations with the police department, sheriff's office, and our legislature to find out what we can do to hold individuals accountable that are making easier access to guns to children.
Mackenzie, I think if I'm not mistaken, the Maryland Senate this past session made the trafficking and or theft of firearms a felony, which it should have been. So that's obviously welcome news.
Theft of a felony didn't get a bill hearing, though, this year.
On the
theft of a firearm, I'm sorry. Theft of a firearm never got a bill hearing this year.
The trafficking of,
right.
Pardon me.
There could be other bills that may have passed, but there are other bills that really targeted some of these things as well, never got off the ground, and we're seeing that continue to happen. But looking at some of the critics of your bill, State's Attorney Bates, were that implementing tougher penalties doesn't deter crime. But are you hearing people talk about the possibility of going away for longer now that this bill is moving forward?
You know, it's funny. I was a criminal defense attorney, 20 plus years in this city. And I have a lot of text messages from a number of individuals that quote unquote were in the game to say, oh, wow, you changed the game. I think the individuals who may not totally understand the criminal element in Baltimore City, they don't necessarily understand that they're watching what's going on. They know what's going on. Individuals will do what they can get away with. And so for me, it was pretty simple. You know, one of the things we even talk about, and they talk about academics and things like that, but I honestly felt that I followed what they said. Johns Hopkins studied. One of the things they talk about, you bring individuals in, you sit them down, you talk to them about the harshness of the penalties. So if the penalty isn't going to be severe and harsh, what are you going to talk to them about? So I knew that 3 years to a young person, they really didn't matter to them because they felt that, you know, that's local time. But they know 5 years, the possibility of 5 years, that was a harsh penalty because that meant they could potentially go to division of correction, i.e. you won't serve your time in Baltimore City. And when you talk about the seriousness and the harshness of the penalties, I think what a number of individuals missed, it wasn't the penalty itself, but it was what it did to them mentally, meaning the individuals who wanted to carry the illegal handguns, because it said, this is the penalty that will take you into an environment, i.e. the division of correction, that you don't want to go to.
All right, we're going to take another quick break. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Fox 45's Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. We're talking with City State's Attorney Ivan Bates, marking his 100 days in office. We're also joined by several other panelists, including Baltimore City Sheriff Sam Cogan, former Mayor Sheila Dixon, and Baltimore City Councilman for this district, Eric Costello. Former Mayor Dixon, I want to ask you a question about the situation given where we are with the Baltimore Police Department, the situation with the consent decree. Are you satisfied with where BPD is at right now under the mayor's leadership and this current administration?
So I understand that today the commissioner went to visit the court, the judge, and he was pleased with some things and wasn't pleased. I think as relates to having the number of officers leave the department, that the police department really needs to come up with an aggressive plan. You know, one of the things that I strive for, and this is where sometimes politics makes things frustrating, when you have things that are working and then when someone else comes in, instead of them building on it, they throw it away because it wasn't their idea, but ultimately they get the credit. I think putting the school back in place for fire and police and EMS, there was an academy. At that time, I'm still saying Walbrook High School, where you get young people who live in the city who can get exposed to what it really means to be an effective police or firefighter or EMS. We need to implement that school again. We need to be aggressive in going back and figuring out what happened with some of the individuals who have applied and were turned down because of the psychological testing. I remember my nephew was turned down because he lost his parents. And was told that you would potentially crack at some time in your life. He was a very successful police officer in the Northern District. He was a sergeant. I'm surprised he decided to retire. He had enough because he knew the city, he knew the people. Mm-hmm. And so we really need to put some focus in that area, as well as I know that police officers are supposed to be touching the community every 15, 20 minutes or so. I mean, that's impossible. Come on. With the calls. I mean, calling 911, sometimes you get put on hold. Mm-hmm. So we really need to deal with and address that. People have to feel safe. Quality of life is important, bottom line.
I want to come back to the quality of life topic and the difference in policies that are now being implemented. But Sheriff Cogan, how do you see helping BPD with the staffing problems? Is there a role for the Sheriff's Department to step in and fill some of those gaps?
Absolutely. And so one of the things that we definitely can do and have been doing is deploying at special events on weekends. So if Fells Point's going to have a festival, or there's going to be a parade on Monument Street, or like the mayor's Christmas parade that almost didn't happen, that's a great role for the Sheriff's Office right now to just step in, able to deploy 30, 40 officers or deputies down there and free up the police department. The other thing is we've been deploying in the evenings to do patrol details, and when we supplement the police department in doing that, and there's not that shooting that pulls all the patrol officers into that area for hours while they're dealing with that helps policing throughout the city. So in our lane and working in conjunction with the police department, we can really help supplement them.
Councilman Costello, are you satisfied with where the mayor and BPD Commissioner Michael Harrison are leading the agency?
Well, the first problem is we have a severe shortage of police officers, and I don't think we've acted aggressively enough to fill that shortage. Sheriff Cogan's team has actually done an excellent job in terms of filling in some of those holes, whether it's special events or patrol deployments in the evening to help assist with some of those quality of life issues. And I think it goes back to what former Mayor Dixon said. The city is simply not doing enough when it comes to quality of life crimes, whether that's code enforcement, illegal dumping, parking enforcement, that neighborhood business that's a nuisance and continues to be a nuisance. So I think there's a lot more that the city can do, not just on the police side, in terms of assisting with those quality of life crimes. And again, this is something you've heard our state's attorney say on a number of occasions. We can enforce those quality of life crimes and have a balance without arresting everyone. The goal is not to arrest everyone. The goal is to make sure that people that have lived in the same neighborhood for 40 years don't have an open air drug market on their stoop. They deserve to not have that. So we've got to figure out a way to give them the tools to make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, and during your inaugural address, State's Attorney Bates, you made it clear, you said that you were reversing some of the policies of the previous administration when it comes to quality of life crimes. Are you already seeing a difference when it comes to that messaging? Has BPD been receptive to this change? What are you seeing?
Well, BPD has been very receptive to the change, but when I got into the office, I realized the prior administration, when they decided not to prosecute those matters or hold people accountable, they didn't hire any more prosecutors. If you don't have the prosecutors to handle those cases, then you can't handle those cases. So the first thing we needed to do was go, and that's why you've seen us really be aggressive in handling and hiring. The other thing you have to do is train these young prosecutors. We were able to work with the district court so that every other Friday, starting March 3rd, there's no court in the afternoon. So now they're in-depth training. They're also working with the police department to have training. Now we've also gotten to the point now, the police department, and I've spoken to the commissioner, and we're very excited to move in a direction where we want to have what's called a citation docket. And so, that will be a couple things. One, what can we do to make sure that we're not arresting our way out of this? Number two, what can we do to make sure that we don't take officers off the post? What can we do to make sure we hold individuals accountable? And what can we do to get back to a positive quality of life? We can't do it ourselves. So the citation doc, we realized, okay, how does this work?
Right.
So I have my deputy who's here tonight, Deputy Greg Solomon. I gave her the task. She's done a phenomenal job. She began to reach out to the courts to make sure that everybody was on one page, because if we're going to do a docket, we have to get the court to buy in. Reached out to the public defenders, reached out to the police department, reached out to Monzi, reached out to so many other providers. And she's actually here tonight, and I'd like her, if possible, to talk a little bit about the work you've done thus far so we can begin. Now, it's not happening right now. We're looking hopefully the late spring, but getting everyone together so people understand how big a task this really has been.
Come on up. I think that is a question. How will this work? What does that look like? Logistically, how do you envision this docket moving forward?
Thank you, S.A. Bates. At this moment, we are developing a citation docket in order to address low-level offenses, quality of life criminal citations, whether that is trespassing, loitering, open container, crimes of those natures. We would like to address these crimes in district court. Our goal is to offer community service as well as wraparound services. We have collaborated with the police department. We have collaborated with the judges. We also collaborated with several stakeholders. I see DSS is present, Ms. Smith is present. We would like to be able to offer drug treatment court if necessary, mental health court if necessary, job training and employment coupled with a stipend. Our approach is a holistic approach. We're not just simply trying to send people to jail for low-level offenses. We would like to give them an opportunity to seek the services that they may need. We have a holistic approach. We would like to balance accountability as well as public safety.
Yeah. And if I may, everybody that Deputy Solomon has spoken to, could you just stand up so everybody in here can understand the types of people, the types of organizations that'll be there? Stand up. And you can see we have her resiliency to help with some of the sex workers, so we can understand what's going on, the sex trafficking, sex workers. We have Monzi. We also have Ms. Smith and her organization. We have a number of drug treatment providers. This isn't about the state's attorney's office. There are a lot of organizations that are already doing the work. This is about how can we hold people accountable? How can we deal with quality of life crimes? We're not trying to have mass incarceration. We're not trying to give people records. But let's also be clear. These individuals who we give the services to, once, maybe twice, if you decide you just don't want the services, you just can't go back and do what you want to do, because eventually we're going to have to prosecute you. I don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. But there also has to be accountability.
Councilman Costello, you talked about open-air drug markets, and we've seen them. We've seen videos of them happening. Do you think, what's the role or the connection between the open-air drug markets, drug dealing, and the violent crime that we're seeing across the city? The correlation in there, and how can that correlation be broken?
Look, the corner of Pennsylvania and Lawrence, which was the site of a mass shooting 2 months ago, is one of the most well-known open-air drug markets in the state of Maryland. There's a direct correlation But it's not just the violent crime. I mean, looking at the entire picture, it's about quality of life. I could give you 2 stories. I won't share specific names or 100 blocks in this neighborhood in Upton and in Druid Heights, where long-term residents of the community have been battling with open-air drug markets, trying to get some sense of relief from the police department. And while the police department's been receptive, you know, the command structure in the Central District is probably the best in the entire city, in my humble opinion. They still struggle with it. They're oftentimes playing whack-a-mole. So, you know, as you heard Mayor Dixon mention before, these officers are just responding to call after call after call because they don't have the appropriate level of resources in patrol. And until we get those resources in patrol, we're not going to be able to deal with these things on a consistent and sustained basis so that we can start to chip away at the problem.
Sheriff Kogan, is that where your deputies can really step in? I mean, if this is, and I think everybody in the city knows where these corners are, where the open air drug markets are, you see it all the time, and if it's so widely known, I hear it all the time, how come officers aren't doing anything about it?
Right, so I'm gonna go back to the citation docket for a second, right?
Okay.
Because this is, this ties into all that, I think. So we have these quality of life crimes, and we also have people with substance abuse issues. And there are reasons why people are committing some of these crimes, and that's addiction and mental health. And one of the ways to get them treatment is if they're engaged constitutionally by a law enforcement officer and brought in front of the court. And some things like mental health court, that's exactly how you have to access that, is you have to access those things through, unfortunately sometimes through an encounter with the law enforcement officer who recognizes that we have people who have, you know, severe illnesses or severe addictions, and they're committing crimes, and they're harming their own community, and they're harming themselves. And the goal, I believe, of the citation docket, not to speak for you, is try to get them treatment so that stops, and so we help people. And sometimes that's going to take people like the sheriff's office and the police department recognizing that, look, when you encounter somebody and they're doing these things, let's get them help. And we do that by, and it looks like we're going to be able to do that by issuing a citation and getting them in front of a diversion program, which will then have some kind of treatment. And then we'll look at like all the people who have died from fentanyl, right, overdose. You know, what would have happened to them had they been offered drug treatment, you know, and had been forced a little bit more than, you know, we don't just leave that alone when we see somebody who's like mentally ill and breaking people's property and destroying people's property, or someone who's so addicted that they're stealing, you know, packages, or, you know, someone who's so out of control, they're doing things to people's porches, and then the community can't go from point A to point B without being accosted. How do we address that? And I think it's a great idea that the state's attorney has, and I think that, you know, all the law enforcement can get on board with that to try to say, you know, hey, we are going to have these encounters with people who are addicted and people who are mentally ill. And our goal is to have a constitutional encounter with them. But if they don't stop voluntarily, we're going to have to make them stop, and we can issue them a citation and get them in front of the court so we can evaluate that, and the court can do their job, and we can see if they need to have treatment or placement somewhere.
Does that include addressing the open air drug markets and going after some of the more higher level people who are engaged in this activity?
I think so, but you know, the open air drug market is functioning because people are addicted and going to it, and so I think you address the supply and demand. You got to do everything, and I think this is a great way to handle that.
And I think that at the federal level, there's been a lot of effort in really going after the high level individuals who are bringing the drugs here. But I just wanted to add on to this holistic approach, and I think that we need to build on. We also have other police forces. You have the MTA police.
Right.
You have the universities police at the hospitals, the universities at the schools, and I think, and you have our Baltimore City Public Schools. And I think with the shortage, that also can be built in where they can patrol in those areas of where their facilities are located, and also be in communication with the police department, state's attorney's office, et cetera, so that you have extra eyes and ears on what's going on in those communities.
We've seen some.
We've done it, yeah.
And we've seen success around diversion programs. If you look at the area, which is also in the 11th District around Lexington Market, with the University of Maryland Baltimore School of Social Work, the work that's being done on North Utah and North Paca Street, law enforcement assisted diversion, that program where we've got up to, I think, 110 individuals in that program where, you know, if you're caught engaged in illegal activities such as low-level drug dealing, you're given an opportunity. and you're given one of two paths. You can either, get a job and get wraparound support services, and these different organizations will work with you and provide those services, or you can choose not to, and then there's a stiffer set of consequences to pay. The goal is obviously to not make that arrest, to be able to divert younger individuals into these programs to get them the support services they need so they get on the right track. So we've seen that success, but the important thing to note is those programs have to be scalable. We need large-scale investments in those programs across the entire city. It's great for one neighborhood like the area around Lexington Market, but it's not going to work citywide unless we really put money and political backing behind it.
Do you think there is political backing and support for that right now?
I think there's a lot of political support for programs like LEAD and programs like With the School of Social Work, and there's a host of others throughout the city. But again, they need to be scalable. We need to have large-scale buy-in, and we need to have real dollars, not $50,000 grants. Millions and tens of millions of dollars behind those programs to scale them up.
Do you think that looking at that, and we're seeing so many different programs, a patchwork of programs across the city, and like you said, a few $1,000s here, a couple $1,000s there, would it be better for the city to cut those fundings and really find one or two programs that are successful to really support, that could see real results?
Look, pound for pound, Baltimore City outpunches its weight class in terms of philanthropy in the entire United States of America. There's no question about it. The spirit of giving in this city is incredible. There are organizations that have tens of $1 million endowments to organizations that are running on a shoestring budget of $17,000 a year. It's not my place to say, which organization should we be supporting versus not supporting? Should it only be big ones versus small ones? I think all of these organizations are having some type of positive impact in our community. But I think when we find organizations that work, that have a scalable model, we really need to get behind them and help grow them.
We're running out of time, so State's Attorney Bates, in 30 seconds, give us the report card for the first 100 days.
30. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to my pastor, Pastor Dickens, and all my members here, fellow members of New Metropolitan. Thank you. Thank everybody for coming. I want to thank everybody who's here. But what I would say is that right now, I think we're heading the right direction. What I want to give it an A, I think we're an A-. There's some things we could have done a little bit better, but I think we're moving in the right direction. With all the hires, with passing the bill, with changing the culture, and now we're moving in excitement. Yeah, we're moving in the right direction. But we also recognize that it's still incomplete. We still have a long way to go.
Perfect. All right, thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists, Baltimore City Sheriff Sam Cogan, former Mayor Sheila Dixon, and Baltimore City Councilman for this district, Eric Costello. That's all of the time we have for tonight's Your Voice, Your Future Fox 45 Town Hall. I appreciate everyone for coming and participating in this discussion and listening. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are they coming up here? Okay. Okay. Are the questions coming? Okay. Yeah. Perfect. All right, welcome back, and thanks for sticking with us. We're going to ask a few more questions this evening for our town hall. I want to address this to everybody. If you could keep it pretty brief, because we do have some questions from the audience that I want to make sure we have time and get to. But if there were two things that each of you could go through and address, what do you think needs to be done to really address the violent crime issue in the state, or in the city really, that could be implemented and not, big, broad plans, but really actionable steps that can be taken? Sheriff Cogan, we'll start with you.
So for us, it's going to be the service of warrants for repeat violent offenders. and taking people who are arrested on those warrants and debriefing them effectively to see if we can learn about crimes that have yet to been discovered. So that would be one. And the second one, again, is to grow our organization so we can backfill some of the traditional police functions that are out there and deploy on weekends and in the evenings to try to assist the police department in with the policing of the city. So those are the two.
State's Attorney Bates?
Well, one would be within our organization, State's Attorney's Office, to have a full complement of attorneys. I'd like to have about 220 prosecutors, because that would alleviate some of the workload that others have, so that they could thoroughly prepare the cases, so that these violent offenders who are out there committing the murders and attempt murders and shootings, that we could find them guilty and we could give them significant amount of jail time to hold them accountable. But the other thing I think that is also we really needed in the school system, I think we really need to go into the school system and help young people understand how their anger management issues, how to deal with issues, and when you get angry, when you get upset, understanding that and giving a safe place, a safe environment, a safe space so that they can go ahead and understand that. Even if we give them like community court inside the school systems so they can understand that process, and so that they can sometime now, i.e. let's do a court process, a judge could have juries of their own peers, and there's a problem between two of them. Let's hear what the students in the school have to say.
Former mayor?
As a former teacher, working with parents and children at a very young age, at the beginning of birth, and following them all the way through, providing them with the support that they need. Secondly, just cleaning up our neighborhoods, because a lot of times crime and crime go hand in hand, and we need to clean up our neighborhoods.
Councilman Costello?
First thing is, on the city council, we deal with everything from the unserious of helping a constituent to file a police report over the internet because something was stolen off their porch, to being in the middle of a situation where you're trying to locate the relative of a shooter to protect them from retribution on the same evening, and everything that you could imagine in between. I think for city council members, we need to continue to prioritize public safety and figure out new and creative ways that we can be supportive of our constituents and of the neighborhoods we represent. And the second thing is we really need to be supportive of a balanced approach to public safety, which includes enforcement and diversion. Neither of those things works on their own. We saw 15 or 20 years ago what strictly enforcement could do. And I think we've seen, recently what a lack of enforcement can do. And we've got to figure out a way to make those things balanced and work together. And we need to be supportive as a council of both of those things in a balanced manner.
All right, let's get to some of these questions from our viewers who submitted questions to our form. I think this will be for you, Councilman Costello. This is from Dr. Willis from Mount Vernon. It says, when I walk through City Hall and I listen to how people talk on the phones, it often feels as they are annoyed. Why is it so hard to address people who are in these positions if they're not performing? Can you do anything about that?
I'm a bit confused by the question, but my office number is 410-396-4816. You're welcome to call anytime. There's a lot of dedicated, hardworking public servants in City Hall. I know everyone might not be having the best day, but I think you'll find there's a lot of folks there that are working around the clock to try and make life better for residents in our city.
Perfect. Let me just add, I think it's very important that from the top down that you have to tell the people that work for you that you work for the citizens, and the way we get paid is by the taxpayers. And so you need to be as professional and clear and be helpful to the citizens. And people need to come back to work inside of the city government.
No teleworking?
You see, I'm looking at Eric Costello.
What I'll say is that one of the first things that I did when I became state's attorney, day one, we ended the teleworking policy. We lost a couple, but we also gained a lot more, because what you needed to do is gain the opportunity to have teamwork, communication, and also, let's be honest, businesses also need to flourish and grow in our city. And when individuals come and they're back in the city and they're working, they're also spending their money helping businesses grow. Business growing only helps Baltimore City, so we can have the tax dollars to do the programs that our community needs.
You sound like a mayor.
No, you're good.
Councilman Costello, do you have an update on the city's teleworking policy?
I don't, and I believe it varies from agency to agency. For example, the Environmental Control Board, those hearings are all virtual. That's something that we're going to look into during budget hearings this year. Look, the world changed for employers when COVID happened, and I think we've gotten on the other side of COVID or gotten to a good place. And we've got to figure out how to get people back in the office, especially for the district I represent downtown. You know, the city government campus is a huge boon for local restaurants in downtown. We want to get people back out on the street, walking, talking, you know, patronizing our local businesses. But we also have to find a way to provide some type of quality of life balance. Whether that's, you know, a day of telework per week so you can deal with a doctor's appointment or picking your kid up early from work. But as the former mayor said, we really do need to get folks back in the office.
Do you think city government and city function is being hindered by teleworking right now? The audience says yes.
I've heard the audience very clearly. Yeah, I think there's a lot of frustration, right? When you call the permit office and you can't get through to anyone. And for months on end, you weren't able to go down to the Benton building or the Woolman building and pull a permit and actually sit down and talk with another human being. I think that creates a lot of frustration. I understand why we did it for part of COVID, but I do think that we need to continue ramp up getting folks back in the office so that people can have that one-on-one customer service experience that they deserve.
And I think you need a balance, because I was online and I know how to work a computer, trying to deal with an issue, and it kept saying this information is not correct, et cetera, et cetera. So I had to end up going there. Actually, people were in the permits department. Nobody else was in the Benton building for HCD, but the permits people were. But everybody's not savvy on the computer. You know, older individuals are not necessarily. And so when we continuously, you know, just offer that one way, that's not fair to people.
I will say public information requests are delayed because of COVID, and I feel like that's a little frustrating.
That's more your wheelhouse, Mackenzie.
There's taken a long time to get some information, but let's move on to another question. This is going back to some of the conversations we had around juvenile violence and juvenile crime. This is from Charlene, who says, in light of the recent incidents involving youth at the Inner Harbor and a pending law enforcement curfew, I need to know exactly what is the intentional effort and plan for elected officials to collaborate with churches and other organizations to bring positive activities that actually resonate and will engage younger individuals. Ivan Bates, have you had any conversations with the city about that?
Not really, in the sense that, you know, working with the churches. But one of the things I like to tell people is that my office is, we're about the enforcement. You know, in terms of some of those other policies, that's the mayor's office. That's what the mayor's bailiwick is. But what we're here to support. Do I think it's important to bring the churches, to bring the community together? Without a doubt. But right now is the mayor who said that he was going to go ahead and invoke the curfew. I know there are going to be some work groups he talked about. I think those work groups will come up with some answers on how they wish to implement this. But I will definitely make sure when, you know, my team was involved in a work group that we'll take that request and say, hey, people want to know what's going on with the churches, what's going on with these other organizations. There's so many people that want to make change. But I also would like to throw in there, let's also look at the parents. I'm a parent of a 6-year-old. I understand how difficult and how energetic they are. I get it. My number one priority is my child. But also parents, at 1 o'clock in the morning, you have a 12 or 13-year-old, you got to know they're in your house. And so we got to hold parents accountable as well. So we can't always look to only the elected officials. We got to look toward everybody. For us to really fix what's going on with these young people, we have to work together.
Mayor Dixon, do you think the current administration is doing enough to engage with these other organizations in the city that could really help and provide opportunities for Baltimore's young people?
So, you know, as Councilman Costello mentioned, there are a lot of different organizations. There's probably more now than there's ever been before. And I guess the question is there a need to do some assessments on what's working and what's not working? Along with last weekend when kids were out of school, did a group of folks go down to the Inner Harbor to maybe engage and find out from some of these young people what kind of things are you looking for? Everybody, and we have rec centers that are open. We have all types of activities for young people to do and get them. In today's society, there is no excuse. There's no excuse for a job because there are wanted signs, wanted signs everywhere on people's windows, etc. So it's really about finding out who the leaders are. What is it that you can do where you aren't going to go and disrupt businesses from operating that will keep you engaged? I know young people like rap groups and things. Maybe connect with some of the promoters in the city and find an area and do some free concerts for them on Friday evenings at night so that it doesn't disrupt what's going on Pratt Street now that oil season is in. I mean, there are a whole host of things. I mean, we were all young at one time. When we used to leave school, I went to Northwestern. We would meet at Mondawmin to find out where the parties were. We would then go home, change, and go to the parties. But we weren't acting crazy, you know? We were civilized in most cases. And so it's really about, and then parents' responsibility. I have children, they're adults now, but when they were young, I kept them busy. They were involved in so many activities and events. I also kept them on a schedule, which, believe it or not, works. Now, when I share this with people, when I used to be mayor and city council president at schools, a lot of young people say, huh, you had them going to bed at what time? But that was all about training from the time they were young till they got older, so.
Looking at the curfew, Councilman Costello, did you know the mayor was going to announce the curfew when he did Sunday night?
No, I wasn't aware of it, but the curfew is something that's been on the books since 2012 or 2013, and in fact...
We had the curfew, and we had a curfew center.
Yeah.
And now it'll be enforced. I guess the question is, did you know he was going to announce the enforcement of this curfew?
No.
Do you wish that he did?
He announced the curfew, so, you know, rolling with that.
We'll roll on to the next question from an audience member. This is definitely for State's Attorney Bates. This is from Brooks, who says, we've talked about this, but really going back to why are gun laws being enforced for legal gun owners? I know we had a lengthy conversation about it, but I think that a lot of people do want to know, why are they, if they're following the laws, how come they're the ones getting talked about and being targeted by this new law?
You know, like I said, I'm not a member of the General Assembly. My focus has really been on illegal handguns, but I also said that as a prosecutor, you also have to use your common sense. You know, I'm a big believer in individuals getting their legal permits and your carry permits. I was in the military, but I also understand that we have to do it in a way that's common sense and that is safe. My focus is going to be on illegal handguns. And like I said, if under Senate Bill 1, if an individual's carrying a gun in an area and location and that they shouldn't, we would evaluate that case and may just be a warning at that moment in time and a seizure of the weapon to sit down and say, okay, you've been educated. You know, it's difficult to say. I think what we're trying to do is strike a balance between all these shootings that we see going around the country to make sure that that doesn't happen in Maryland. And it is a tough balance.
I know that the critics have argued that the SB 1 isn't constitutional. Do you have constitutional concerns about it?
You know, as a lawyer, I let the courts make those decisions. I think that within the General Assembly, I'm sure they had their lawyers look at it, but I see arguments on both sides.
Now, this is another question from Tay Bryan, who says, will you fight for repeat offenders to serve more time or 15 years after their third strike or their third offense?
Well, my office believes that if it's a repeat violent offender, that we're trying to go ahead and hold them accountable. I'll give an example of, we had actually your station brought to our attention. An individual had a handgun, was convicted, and we didn't file the enhancements. We had to look internally, realize we did not have a process when to target or when to actually find out when individuals were second and third time gun offenders, because once we changed our process, we were able to let the prosecutors know, file the documentation appropriately, because when you're going to give additional penalties, you have to let an individual know for a certain amount of time. We did that. A brand new prosecutor who was part of our initial hiring class, first trial after a number of trainings, and we gave the enhancement which gave that individual this second handgun up to 10 years. That individual was found guilty, and that individual received a sentence of 10 years, suspend all but 5. which was significant for two reasons. One, it told individuals, one, stop carrying illegal handguns. If you have one chance to come back a second time, we're looking at 10 years. So we will hold individuals accountable. I don't like a hard, fast rule, 15 this. Every case is different. Not everybody deserves the same sentence. But when we find them and they deserve it, yes, we will give it to them.
Here's another question from Will from Park Heights. Have you had any conversations with the judiciary regarding sentencing and sentencing guidelines? Because I know that we've talked about this, about the issue of judges perhaps not handing down the sentences that prosecutors are even asking for.
Well, you really don't have those conversations with judges because ex parte, you can't have those one-on-one conversations. So it's something our office is doing. Sometimes we see certain issues in reference to maybe the judge looks at the law and interprets the law a little differently than us. We're actually now starting to file appeals. And so the way that we try to speak to the court is if we go to take an appeal and the judge is overturned, that's the way we speak in court. And so we're going to start to see more of that happening. One of my deputies, Tom Donnelly, was an appellate lawyer, one of the best in the state. So I think give us some time, you'll see some cases being overturned, and that's the way we're speaking to the court to let them know that we're not happy with certain actions.
And I would just add that with the Criminal Coordinating Council, where you had all the public safety entities, including the judges, were part of that, and that was a real significant piece that was part of our whole strategy in reducing crime. So you have the administrative judge there, so they can then go back to talk with and meet with those judges. And I'm not sure if that, I know it's been reinstituted, but I don't know whether or not they've actually started meeting, because that could be a key game changer for this whole effort across the board, not just on police, but across the board.
I will say that my office, the public defender's office, the court, the chief criminal judge, they do meet, they do talk. And so I know from my office, Chief Operating Officer Catherine Flynn, she talks to the court and she in those meetings. And that's articulated to the chief judge, the judge in charge of criminal, and that's, we're told it's disseminated. But specifically, each and every single judge, their actual pleas and what's going on with the sentencing, I think sometime they can really tell.
Here's another question from Evie from East Baltimore, and this is something that we hear at Fox 45, and I'm sure other places as well hear it often. How many wraparound services will it take before Baltimoreans can stop burying their loved ones? What protections are in place for would-be victims or citizens who are obeying the laws and are afraid of their communities where they're living? We'll go down the line because I think everybody can provide some options. Sheriff Kogan, what's your response?
So one of the things the Sheriff's Office was very involved in when I first started, and they're not at all, is witness protection. And that's such a huge thing that when people want to give information or they come into court or they're witnesses, that they feel safe and they feel like no one's going to harm them. And if someone does threaten to harm them, then someone goes out and addresses that issue and looks at the person who made those threats and takes them into custody if necessary. And so for one of the things I think the Sheriff's Office can do is absolutely work with the State's Attorney's Office and talk about when people are coming to court that they feel safe and they feel like the state's attorneys and the public defenders and everyone who's coming to court to be a witness feels like that's a safe space where they can give witness testimony and they're not going to be retaliated against, which is a huge problem in Baltimore.
So with our office, one of the first things I did was understand victim witness. The previous administration, Governor Larry Hogan, had given a great deal of money to the state's attorney's office, and we began to do a deep dive and realized that we felt that it wasn't being used properly. We hired a brand new head of the victim witness, came from Baltimore County. In Baltimore County, they really had a good, I think, feel of how to deal with victim witness. We have around 31, 32 individuals. And what we realized we needed to do was have better communication with witnesses and victims from day one. And not just stop and wait until the day it came into court, but continue throughout that process to understand what issues did they have, what did they need, how can we give them those services so that they could, whether it's trauma, whether they need to have the counseling, whether they needed to be moved, whether they just needed to sit down and have someone listen to them. And that's how our office is now changing the way in which we handle victim witness services, and also making sure that they know when the court date is, who the prosecutor is, and we're not dragging them back and forth from court so they're re-traumatized. And that's really on us to use the money that we've been given previously the proper way.
Mayor Dixon?
Communication I think is going to be key. I think having the resources for them in order to have that protection. Third, that you have all the different levels, because one of the frustration things that I hear sometimes when I'm out is that the person, the detectives that has been assigned to the case, hasn't done any follow-up, they haven't talked to the person or communicated, and that's key. And that so the police department, state's attorney, whoever else is involved in this process, communicating is significant and key to those individuals so that they know that they have someone who they can go to and to listen, and then having the resources to support what's needed while they're going through what they're going through.
Councilman Costello?
Again, communication, as Mayor Dixon mentioned, that's the biggest piece. Providing information, educating, victims, educating witnesses, family members of victims, what resources are available. There's a ton of resources out there. Obviously, there's never going to be enough to make that crime or that trauma go away. But there are resources out there, and we've just got to do a better job of making sure that all of our agencies are working together to get that information out there.
Here's another question from John from Canton, and this is directed at you, Councilman Costello. He says, when will CEO of City Schools, Sonia Santelises, be held accountable for the poor situation and the performance of city schools? How much more failure do Baltimore City students have to achieve, especially when they're getting, this person says $18,000, but it's $21,000 per student to educate them?
Look, I think there's a lot of frustration, and you heard it tonight, over the success of our school system. And really what that's about is the success of our young people, and that's something that we all deeply care about. The CEO of the school system serves at the pleasure of the Board of School Commissioners. There's a process by which those individuals are appointed, and there's a process by which those individuals can hold the CEO accountable. From the council's perspective, we continue to hold oversight hearings of operations of city schools, and try and make sure that they have the resources that they need to put our young people in the best position humanly possible to succeed. And I think that's what we're going to continue to do.
If you were on the School Board of Commissioners, would you move to remove Dr. Santelises?
I'm not on the School Board of Commissioners.
If you were?
I'm not on the School Board of Commissioners. I don't pretend to understand the responsibility involved with being on the School Board of Commissioners, just like I don't to be a senator or a delegate in Annapolis or a senator or congressman in DC. My job is to be the city councilman for the 11th district, to make sure that city services work for individuals, to make sure that we have safe communities that they can thrive in, and that's, I can't answer that question beyond that.
Next question, and probably our last question. This is from no name, but it says it's a family member of a murder victim. What is being done about the courts repeatedly putting individuals on probation, and they have multiple probation cases in multiple jurisdictions? Why is that happening? Is that a communication breakdown across city lines, the county line? State's Attorney Bates, can you provide an answer?
Yes, it is a communication issue. It's a communication issue when our office finds that another individual has a case, and this individual is on probation in another jurisdiction, then it's incumbent upon my office and my prosecutors to reach out. One of the things you can do now, there's a violation of probation. You can actually have the violation of probation judge listen to our case in the city, and we can try that case in that other jurisdiction. And if that individual is found guilty, not even guilty by beyond a reasonable doubt, it's preponderance of the evidence, therefore now that individual, that judge can sentence that individual to their backup time. That's something that's not used a lot, but it's something that we've talked to. I've talked to Baltimore County a great deal because we're finding out there are a number of individuals on probation in Baltimore County with significant time hanging over their head, and they now running around Baltimore City with guns. This will go ahead and alleviate some of the backlog that we see in our system, but also hold individuals accountable. And so those are the conversations we're having. But before we can even get to that point, I gotta rebuild that office. So yes, there is an opportunity. There's light at the end of the tunnel, and that is something we've already had those discussions, Baltimore County, Scott Schellenberger, and myself.
The Sheriff's Office, warrant apprehension, is that something that you could help with these people who are on probation in other jurisdictions and working with other agencies to go and serve those warrants?
Yes, that's what we do. That's our bread and butter. That's how we want to help out. So like he was talking before about finding someone, they get the 5 years all but suspended. Well, they're going to be on probation. And if they go out and they violate their probation, the state's attorney's office needs the sheriff's office to go out and apprehend them and bring them back in front of the court. It just doesn't happen. You know, people get these warrants issued on them. They're still walking around committing crimes, harming the community, and it's incumbent upon me as the sheriff to designate the people to go out and get them and bring them back in front of the court so the state's attorney can do what needs to be done.
Was that not happening under the previous administration?
I think that the level of warrants that were being worked is lower than what was needed to bring people to justice and bring them back in front of the court. And so we're looking to really improve that so we don't have people who have an arrest warrant on them for a violent crime, who have committed another violent crime, are still in Baltimore harming the community. That's like critically important for public safety.
Was that was that a function of the previous state's attorney's administration, or was that an issue because of the previous sheriff?
We had warrants that were open that weren't being addressed in the previous administration. And so this
The sheriff's office or the state's attorney?
The sheriff's office. Okay. And so this needs to be addressed. It's critical that this is addressed. So we don't have a backlog of warrants that we could work. And we prioritize, instead of prioritizing evictions, we prioritize public safety. And we really make sure that we have enough people and people assigned and people trained to go out and bring violent repeat offenders back to the court so that the state's attorney can address that properly.
There's been a lot of conversation tonight about partnership, collaboration, and communication. Before we wrap, I want to ask you, State's Attorney Bates, do you believe that you have the right partner in City Hall to help you move this forward?
You know, this is what I believe. I believe in life, I try to stay in my lane. And what I know is this, that whomever the citizens decide to elect, I'll be happy to work with, and I'll make it work because I work for the citizens.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you for all of the questions we got from our viewers. You've been watching a Fox 45 Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. Have a great night.